It is great to be back. The Spirit said do, and I did. The Spirit said go, and I went. The Spirit said pray, and a lot of you prayed. Even the agnostics I heard were praying for me, and I really appreciate that. It's a beautiful thing. You know, I look out. I was looking out a moment ago, and I saw that Eva Unterman is here. And she is one of our heroes in this community, a Holocaust survivor when she was a little girl in the Holocaust. Eva, it's a blessing to have you in our congregation. This is the kind of person that comes out when... Thank you, Eva. Thank you. But she knows what it's like to be persecuted, to be on the run, to be hunted for your life, for who you are, for something you can't change. She knows, and so she came. She wanted to hear what's going on in Uganda because she knows it here in her heart. And if you've ever been to the Sherman Miller Museum, the Jewish Holocaust Museum here in town, you'll see that the very first item when you walk in is a Ku Klux Klan outfit on a mannequin because they know these things are all connected. What I'm talking about, what's going on in Uganda, what's going on in Tulsa, what happened in World War II, it's all connected. And so that's the question that's before us. And one of the greatest and biggest questions in religion has always been, who should I love? It's not an easy question because loving involves commitments that are often hard to keep. When I decided to say yes to the request to go to Uganda last week to support my colleague there, Reverend Mark Kiimba of the Unitarian Universalist Church, that was the question in the background. Who should I love? When some people heard that I was going to Uganda to support a gay rights movement in the wake of an oppressive, homophobic culture and in the midst of a draconian bill that is making its way through their parliament, there were people who questioned why I would leave my wife and my 2 children and a congregation of people whom I love to put myself at risk for the rights of people who I don't really know, and in an effort that's highly likely to fail, at least in the immediate term. I'd be lying if I didn't admit that I asked myself those same questions. I weighed the risks, and I decided that they were real, but they were not too high. And I weighed the risks of not doing what I believed to be right at a time when I thought I could possibly make a difference, and I realized that the consequences of that decision were too high. It's been said that it's far more tragic than losing your life is to find at the end of many years that you have not lived. Of course, if I did not have the full support of my wife and my family and this congregation, I would not have gone. But the risks to me were truly minor in comparison to the risks of the Ugandans who organized this Standing on the Side of Love conference on Valentine's Day in Uganda last week. They live in that country. They will have to stay there. They will have to continue this dangerous fight for years to come while I'm back here with you where we're free. They are literally at risk of imprisonment by law and of stoning and blackmail by their neighbors outside of the law. Can you imagine that? Being hunted by your own government, by your own people, for being who you were born to be, for loving who you feel and cannot help but love, just for being exactly the person who God created you to be. Now, this anti-gay movement in Uganda is a kind of genocide. In fact, those promoting these laws are trying to wipe out an entire culture of people by putting them to death or locking them up or intimidating them for loving a person of the same gender. I'm going to talk about more about this at 4 o'clock today when I can show some more video and tell more stories. But what I found when I arrived were some of the most beautiful, caring, loving, courageous, and intelligent people that I've ever known. The fact of who they love is only one part of who they are. They're doctors, lawyers, teachers, ministers, cooks, business people, mothers and fathers, dancers and artists, taxi drivers, and so much more. Some were unemployed in part due to the homophobia and the prejudice that they face. Some cannot read or write because they stopped going to school at a certain point because they couldn't handle the harassment. And unfortunately, much of the prejudice against gay and lesbian people in Uganda and worldwide is rooted in religion. Now, since Uganda is predominantly Christian, and so, for that matter, is Oklahoma, this morning I want to discuss what the Bible says on these issues. You want to hear that, Gerald? In fact, you'll find that the Bible really has nothing to say about being gay, as we know of it today. And those who use the Bible to back up their own personal and cultural prejudices are no different than those who did the same in years past, who used the Bible to degrade and diminish Jews or black folks or women. Now, we all know that there have been many times in the past when religion in general and Christianity in specific has colluded with injustice and with evil. I'm talking about the Crusades, the endorsement of slavery and racial segregation and apartheid in South Africa, and systems of oppression against girls and women. In these times, people must rise up to save both the church as well as the society. And in these times, faithful Christians and others have stood up, and they have helped to redeem the church as well as their community. That's what Jesus did in his time, and he taught us to do. In fact, it's what Buddha did in his time. For those who don't know much about Buddhism, the Buddha, if you never noticed, Buddhist monks all shave their heads completely. The reason they do that is they came out of a Hindu tradition and a Hindu culture where the clergy wore a special hairdo with a wisp of hair in the back, and it showed their status, and it reinforced the caste system all the way down to those who were considered untouchables. And the Buddha said, no, that's wrong. And so he had all his clergy shave their heads completely to show and to demonstrate that there is no caste system, that there is no one person better than another, to try to protest his own cultural ways and to undermine that status quo. Truly great religious leaders work to reform their religion when their religion starts to sanction evil and oppression. The keynote speaker of the conference in Kampala last week, who you saw in the video, Bishop Sonyojo, he walks in the footsteps of great leaders like Jesus and others who worked to reform their own tradition. His name, as I said, is Bishop Christopher Sonyojo, and he's an Anglican bishop. Now, his views on these issues run sideways to the views of the head of the Ugandan Anglican Church, who's become quite well known in the United States in the last few years because, as Episcopalians here in the United States have divided over the issue of the ordination of gay and lesbian people, what's happened is a number of United States Episcopalian churches have started to align themselves with the Anglican bishop there in Uganda. So Bishop Sonyojo, on the other hand, said at this conference last Sunday that religion must always be on the side of the oppressed. Religion must be driven by love and by brotherhood and by understanding. But so often in difficult times, the majority of a society will attack its weakest and most vulnerable members as a scapegoat to the problems of the day. Uganda's got a lot of problems. Hunger and healthcare and AIDS. I mean, there is no shortage of problems. And for their parliament to be distracted on this issue, it's an old story in politics. We've seen it in the United States. We see it currently in the personal and political attacks against immigrants.